Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our ArcFlash podcast. I'm Jabez Tan here with Kevin Inboden and our special guest Dave Fanning. And really, the podcast here that we're doing is meant to provide a balanced, nuanced, and hopefully unbiased view on the state and most pressing topics affecting the data center and hyperscale cloud industry. What we want to see is our industry to succeed, but we're also not naive cheerleaders nor doomsayers. What we ultimately believe is the best way forward to see our industry experience sustainable growth is by addressing and being transparent with the challenges and also sharing the key themes and trends that are unfolding in this sector as we see it. And so I've been covering this space as an industry analyst since 2011 and currently lead the data center and research practice here at Structure Research. I'm here with Kevin Imboden, my fellow co-host. Kevin, would you say a little few words about where you're coming from as well?
Yeah, started out studying the space also on the data provider space back in 2007, a long time ago. Moved over to brokerage a few years back, and then about a year and a half ago, moved over to Edge Connects. And so now studying the sector from the operator side. And to our guest today, my former colleague on the brokerage side, who has now gone on to wonderful things, Dave Fanning from Gensler. So, Dave, why don't you share some of your background as well?
Yeah, happy to. And Jabez and Kevin, thanks for having me on. I feel honored to be your first guest here. I have been part of the telecom slash data center industry going back to 1999. Back kind of in the original telecom global boom with the development of worldwide fiber optic networks and the infrastructure that supported them. Had a 16-year career with Johnson Controls, part of Global Workplace Solutions, focusing on critical facilities and data centers as part of what we call the technology market unit. It's a business that was acquired by CBRE, and so I spent another 2 years helping to integrate that practice in with the overall data center solutions practice within CBRE, and a focus really on the operations of data centers and the outsourcing of real estate facility management and project management. From there, as Kevin had mentioned, I moved on to Cushman and Wakefield and was the head of their data center advisory practice on a global basis, and was there for just over 3 years, and have moved over to the design side with Gensler, the world's largest architecture firm, and I lead their critical facilities practice area, helping us to expand on a global basis. And there's a lot of demands for growth in the space, and it really does begin with design and figuring out, how do these data centers fit in current parcel of land, or retrofitting an existing infrastructure, all sorts of things I'm sure we'll dive into in the
Well,
discussion.
absolutely. And I guess that's a good question to lead things off is the change of design now, right? AI has now become a widespread phenomenon over the last few months. And these questions around rack density that we've never seen before popped up. We talked about this in our last episode quite extensively. So is this going to
Mhm.
be air cooled design going forward? Is it going to be liquid cooled design? How has all this changed? I mean, I understand there's just wholesale changes throughout the space from folks I've talked to.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely bringing change on, I think, faster than certainly from a design standpoint than we've seen in the past. And so it's not an either or question these days. It's a little bit of both, right? So certainly for larger clients who are building at scale, they are going to look to see how do we incorporate all of this into an air cooled design. It's something that's definitely not going away. Now, the uh, as you mentioned, the rack densities, right, creating more heat than anybody could have anticipated in the past. And simply combining that with the adoption of all of these new technologies that are really bringing forward what maybe people thought they might have needed 2, 3, 4 years down the road. They're needing it now. They're needing it today. So, what are we seeing as a result of that? It's again, it's a combination of each. I think we're starting to see more compact design of data centers that you're not going to have 100,000 square feet of all of these rack densities that have increased by a factor of 5 or 10 even that we're saying, but in smaller and maybe more dispersed settings, we're starting to see that even more integrated into workplaces and so forth. Modular designs that are certainly becoming more prominent as a result of that, and fitting them into existing workplaces and how do you configure that, and really from there, design is really just one component of this. The engineering
Mm.
challenges are substantive in these cases, and so the collaboration and the coordination between mechanical and electrical systems and a design is,
And Dave, just to
that's a
take a
tighter
little step back to
collaboration than ever
provide
before.
context, could you share what types of customers you guys are working with for these data center designs? Are these enterprises, traditional enterprises? Are these hyperscalers? And also maybe a sense of region or geography. Is it North America focused, APAC, European, global?
Hmm. Yeah, so it's definitely a global focus. We work with most of the major hyperscalers. So, everything from, uh, these mega campuses that we're hearing around. It's no longer megawatts you're hearing people talk about, it's gigawatt. The master planning that goes involved with that. We work with a lot of the hyperscalers around that, deploying, 20 to 50 data centers across the globe over, say, a 3 year period. And as we know, with the growth plans in the industry, they can't do it themselves. So that brings us down to the various investors and data center operators that also build out this similar infrastructure, not at the scale that the major hyperscalers are doing, but they could specialize in, say, North America, or they're just recently expanding into Europe or what have you. But it's the things that I think haven't changed in the industry, right? North America is still where the majority of this is happening, but we are really starting to see the growth, particularly in Asia Pacific and Latin America, uh, really start to take off, right? I think we've been talking for years about it's coming, and it's here very quickly. And I think the one thing we've learned with all of these markets around the globe, right? The current infrastructure is pretty much maxed out. So you're seeing moratoriums in the industry, or at least, you know, countries, municipalities hitting the pause button, saying we got to go back and we got to figure this out. And with that, that doesn't mean, okay, we start up the way it was before. We're seeing they we've learned from previous builds. There's more regulation. There's more community involvement in a lot of cases that we're seeing now. So that brings about, really just a different way of thinking on how we design and develop data centers
I think that
than we
brings
have
up
in the
a good
past.
point, right? Because we were speaking the other day and you were talking about community and data centers. And you brought up how we always tend to think as an industry about design in terms of the technical aspects around AI, rack density, cooling, all those important details that we focus
Hmm.
on. And you were the first person to mention to me that the actual physical appearance of the building is mattering more and more, and that might be a way to keep the NIMBYs away with their pitchforks of stopping data center development in a lot of in a lot of neighborhoods. And just because this is slightly, again, less technical, a little off topic, but I'd love for you to expand on that because, again, you were the first person to put that thought in my head, and I hadn't thought of it previously.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we actually have some uh, municipalities reach out to us for input on, you know, there's in a lot of communities, you see the headlines of excessive water usage, right? Excessive power consumption. A lot of data centers that you see aren't necessarily the most, attractive or aesthetically designed, and so that catches a lot of people. Not to mention, more and more with demand for data centers, they are starting to creep up on residential areas like they haven't before. And that brings in other sensitive issues like noise abatement, for example. And so, uh, it's a new element, but it's one the industry has to embrace and is embracing around this, right? You never really had to think about, you know, changing the perception of what a data center is or what it entails. So, and we haven't even touched on the whole sustainability component around data centers, and all this really factors in together today before we even make a decision to break ground on a site. So, things we see are landscaping of all things becoming more and more prominent. Can you use landscaping to just simply help the design or the facade of your data center blend in more and be less noticeable as this gray concrete box, right? We are seeing, uh, whereas a lot of data centers in the past like to remain secretive, right? Almost as if they were hiding in plain sight. Uh, we're seeing companies embrace branding more and more, and having incorporating company logos, company colors, what have you, into both the exterior and the interior of the building. Say if you have meeting space, client showcase
Mhm.
space, what have you, and you really kind of want to show off, uh, who you are as an organization. I think that's something that's been relatively new in the industry as well. You have to demonstrate you're going to be a good neighbor, right? I touched on the noise abatement. Having renewable energy, sustainable design components to your facility, that's becoming more and more of a requirement for sites, at least to show you're going in the right direction. It's not status quo of tilt up concrete walls, right? And generator yards in plain sight. These are things people are starting to think more and more about, and making sure that they're getting more creative, and embracing more of a
And it's an
an
interesting
attractive
point, right?
exterior.
Because relatively speaking, compared to like a nine-figure data center build, these are small add-on costs, right? Like we're not talking about a major fraction of a build. We're talking about what would you say, less than 10% of a change, less than 5% probably, and it'll make such a difference in the community. Mm.
It does, as long as it's something that's planned up front, right? They get a lot more expensive the further you go down the road, and don't have them incorporated in. I mean, they can be challenging though, particularly if you're talking about hybrid materials that you want to incorporate into an exterior facade. And we have all seen the supply chain issues over the past couple of years that have been a challenge in the industry, where these costs have significantly gone up. Maybe they're starting to level off somewhat. So, um, it is. I think it is a fraction of the overall development cost. But again, it's having those discussions early, and just having that mindset of these are they're important to the overall plan for developing this site, beginning with, you know, who do we
Hmm.
have to sell to, for lack of a better word, to gain approval for whatever
And Dave, you
development
touched
that
on a
we're
very important
proposing.
topic in the industry, which is cost. And you mentioned that cost to build has gone up in many markets, many scenarios because of the macro environment. How has cost impacted what you're doing? Or I guess another way to frame it, has it been a major point of discussion with your clients when they think about, hey, I want to build a data center. Hey, Gensler, help me out here. And then does cost make them sort of go back and say, should we even proceed with this build or should we do a more leasing, outsourcing, co-location, bare metal type of environment? Uh, or are they just, hey, we see the demand, we see the long-term trend that a lot of data is going to be outsourced or residing in these specialized infrastructure use cases. And so, costs are costs, but we still believe in the long-term trajectory. So how are you seeing that play out?
Yeah, it's definitely a factor. It always will be a factor. I think, though, companies balance that now with time to market. So uh, some of some of the elements of a design or the build of a data center that they may have foregone in the past because of cost, they can't ignore anymore, right? Like I said, with regulation, with community, with all these other factors that are now coming in to even get a site approved for development, it's the cost of incorporating those. Now it's something almost you can't afford not to do. Otherwise, you are risking, your timeline on when can you turn your site on, right? Where are you going to be prioritized in the queue on when power becomes available? Where's your place in line based on all the other factors of, what are the data centers that meet all these new requirements in these different municipalities? So always a factor, but it's weighed against, can we afford not to do this when we have a time frame that we have to have a data center go live within 36 months, right? Which, and in some cases, we're talking going out 5 years now on builds, which you never heard that, particularly in the US, right? We were seeing data centers going up in 9 months, and we're not seeing that anymore. It's far more complex. A lot more factors are involved in the development of these sites now that really, particularly in a lot of these tier one markets, right? Most of these builds now are, 36 months to 5 years,
Just securing
and
the
in some
power is
cases
36
longer.
months half the time. That's a big problem now.
Yeah, exactly. That really drives everything. And not to mention just simply the size of these campuses that they're looking at, right? Where and the density of these locations, the more equipment that you need, what's the lead times on all of these equipment? I'm sure there are folks who are a lot more versed in it than I am, but all that goes
And
factors into the
you've
planning
touched on
stage.
a few different sort of industry sectors that are using data centers right now, or how their perspective of data centers are changing, whether it's the enterprise, whether it's hyperscale. Um, I know we've talked previously about science-based R&D type or lab environments that are into data centers. I guess that's always a good talking point because it's very untraditional for just the typical data center builds. And anything you could share on that would be very cool. I think share some of the stories about how you're engineering for that now.
Yeah, sure. So we definitely see a convergence of I'm seeing, the phrase or the term labs factoring into or merging with data centers more and more these days, right? A lot of these emerging technologies, they're coming out of more of a R&D or a lab setting, right? And to figure out how we can deploy this more at scale and make it into more of a larger, say more, say 10,000 square foot data hall into more of a data center environment. We see a lot more of that coming online. In addition, just with really technology taking over, your lab environments
Hmm.
are becoming a lot more high density. So they are resembling data center designs more and more. So that's where we really see the two worlds converging. Even in manufacturing, where you have production settings, these tools are getting a lot more sophisticated. So not only are they requiring more power as well, but they're a lot more technologically advanced to the point where they need their own server rooms just to support a single tool in a manufacturing setting. And these were things that, when planning these types of spaces out before, you never had to account for that. So, uh, you know, we get involved with a lot of clients on the enterprise side with uh, if we don't have the space today, right? Space utilization and space optimization is not just for how are these spaces designed for, the flow of people or the day-to-day functionality of what our people do, but also our technology and tools as well. So we're seeing a lot more of that becoming incorporated into a
And not to
client's
mention all the other
real estate
factors which
strategic
just
plan.
enter into this, right? This is going bringing compute back on prem, but at the same time, it's sort of an edge node, or it could be an edge node to a larger compute stored somewhere else. I mean, it just my mind's racing with all that. That like this changes the
Mhm.
architecture a little bit.
It really does, and I think that people what you need to realize is that by coming back on prem, that's you have to think of the functionality, the design of a data center a little bit differently. It's not gonna that doesn't mean we're going back to how enterprise data centers were designed uh, even 5-10 years ago, right? Where they typically were standalone, out of sight, out of view. Just the way technology is today, more and more people need access to these spaces, right? More and more people are working, in these data center settings, be it R&D labs, server rooms, and what have you. And so proximity to the workforce is more important. We're even seeing interesting things around, things I had never
Hmm.
thought of before, but like mobile racks, right? Not just a fixed setting for where your servers sit, but how can we move those racks around a room or around a facility? So traditional data center designs really didn't account for any of this, certainly not the densities that we're talking about, or a conversion from, say, an air cooled to some sort of immersion or liquid cooled
And Dave,
facility.
speaking of densities, I think to level set with a lot of our listeners, I think a lot of the data centers that are built today are built to between 6 to 8 kW per rack of density. And in the past, a lot of the enterprise data centers were basically, anywhere between 3 to 4, optimistically speaking, right, per rack. What densities
Mm-hmm.
are you seeing now that you guys are looking to design for? You can talk in ranges if you don't want to share specifics, but be interesting to hear your take on where densities are today from where what your lens is seeing.
Yeah, well, I really just in the last year, right? Eight to 10 kW per rack really was looked at as aggressive, right? And I think that's quickly gone north of 30. We're hearing applications, and in some cases, well north of 30, right? So fundamental shift in just in theory, in views of what's needed. So, um, and that triggers, I guess the easiest thing I could say from a design standpoint is dimensions of data centers, just simply to accommodate uh, the types of servers that can handle this, or even
Mm.
we're hearing the words quantum computing entering the stage now, and that brings a whole nother set of dynamics that you just don't see in a data center design. We're talking tanks that could be, your ceiling height might have to be north of 25 feet even for some of these applications. And these were things that uh, the data center industry is not really looking at or designing for today. So that and just the adoption of helium gas, cryogenic fluids, all of these things. It's very early days. More and more, we're we're getting involved in conversations very quickly around uh, innovation and design using artificial intelligence for more predictive analysis and diagnostic of, if we try this, what are the outcomes? And then from that data that's generated, okay, how is that going to change the design of this site? So these are things that um, we certainly weren't thinking of even 2 3 years ago, but they're coming on quickly because these technologies are getting adopted, I think, faster than really anybody
That is a
anticipated.
lot to think about. And I think this is worth checking in with you periodically on here because I think this design changes and as efficiency changes, those are going to be questions that affect the entire industry as we go.
Oh, I agree, and like I said, I can stress that the recognition that a lot of these are going to be first generation designs today, right? Moving these out, and then it's also, so we know the demand uh, for data. We know everybody sees the projected build outs in the data center industry over the next 3 to 5 years, and the runway. So how quickly can the design and functionality of these sites, how quickly can they catch up? And that's really a big question today. And there's a lot of unknowns out there in terms of, if we try this, what does that mean for a whole host of other
A lot to think
parameters?
about as we go into this new world. Thanks for coming on, Dave. This has been great. And we'll be having more
Definitely.
exciting guests on the ArcFlash podcast coming up.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Dave.
everyone. Have a wonderful week.